A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me, though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so as I pulled up to my house, I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I had never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just gotten off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to night classes. I had even given him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand, though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor to dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone were hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in the attic just a foot or so away from the access, ready to try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knees down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. That scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, and all the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife from the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. They believed he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil. But I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house, though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going to my closet, and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go to a crawl space at the back of the closet instead of the attic. I try not to think about what would have happened if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of things may not totally make sense. This happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I assume it was really late because there weren't many cars on the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open, and someone violently grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out. I started screaming and crying until the man who grabbed me looked into my eyes and said,
"Be quiet and don't try to run, or I'll kill you."
He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tightly by the arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I kept looking back at the house my mom was in, hoping she'd come out at the last second and save me. I stared at that house as long as I could, while the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and terrified. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects, a bunch of buildings crammed together in a crappy neighborhood. We went into one of the buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like hell, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We went up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy who kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast, I didn't understand what was going on, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette guy punching and kicking the kidnapper in the head and face. The kidnapper was out cold. Cigarette guy picked him up by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling downstairs. He bled everywhere. I still have no idea how Cigarette Guy knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he saw tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe. But he acted instantly. The moment he had a chance, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. Cigarette Guy started pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, "Okay, shut up." He had an attitude, so I listened out of fear. I wasn't as scared of Cigarette Guy as I was of the bearded man, but I was still afraid of him. He started asking me questions with an attitude. "Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers?" I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer his questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home. I told him I didn't. I gave him a broken story about what happened, and somehow, with the little information I gave him, he figured out where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road was passing a house with Christmas lights on it, even though Christmas was already over. I think he knew the area well enough to figure it out. Honestly, I don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyway, he told me he would take me back if I promised, over and over, that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him, or anyone who looked like him. He made me promise I wouldn't tell the police anything at all. He had an attitude, but I didn't care what he asked. I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still lying at the bottom, bleeding where Cigarette Guy had thrown him. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead. And honestly, I hope he was. Cigarette Guy stepped over him, and I followed. We walked outside, and Cigarette Guy looked around, panicked. I remember him saying, "The police don't like me." We left the projects, and my feet still hurt. He was walking fast, practically in a panic, and I had to jog just to keep up. I started crying, and he asked what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms and walked down the road. Then I remember him swearing and running behind a house or building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried, but my legs could barely move, and I was scared. The cop car kept driving and left before I could even get close to it. He kept swearing to himself, picked me up again, and ran down the street. He carried me in both arms, fast, through the neighborhood. I saw my mom and her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. Cigarette Guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited that the pain in my legs disappeared. He ran off as I ran toward them. I ran to the police and my mom. She picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started asking both of us questions. I don't remember much of what they asked, but I remember my mom telling them some convoluted story that didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything. I didn't say much. I just cried. A lot. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up. He immediately knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up and had time to think about that day, I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembered about the situation. He told me what he thinks happened, based on what I explained to him years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped. Someone saved me, but that person had warrants. He wasn't mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation. Imagine being a criminal on the run, suddenly stuck with a kidnapped girl, and you just beat a guy half to death. If the police had caught him with me, he could have gone to jail for kidnapping. With my mom lying, and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't have been able to tell them that the man had actually helped me. Because while it was all happening, I didn't even realize he was helping me. This story happened a few years ago. maybe sometime between 2019 and 2022, so pretty recently. But I still can't remember many details, so I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. I used to live in this old apartment building for a really long time, ever since I was born. I lived there for quite a while, switching in and out of different floors every few years. Once I got to the 5th floor, everything seemed normal. I got to know most of the neighbors, except for one. From what I can remember, this neighbor lived about 3 doors down from me, so you'd expect to see him a lot. But I never did. I never saw him leave or enter his apartment. I never really thought much about it because he was just so private. From what I knew, he was most likely Albanian, or maybe Middle Eastern. At least that's what I'd heard. The area I lived in wasn't very diverse. It mainly consisted of Hispanics and Albanians, and a few other Muslim communities. It was a crowded neighborhood, heavily influenced by gang activity, mostly among the Hispanic population, but the Albanians had some involvement too. I remember going out to pick up a pizza about a block away from my building. There was this group of Albanians standing around, testing out tasers for some reason. I don't know why, but they also had guns and basically everything you'd expect from a gang: vapes, firearms, weed, other drugs, etc. I'd always see them in local stores, which were usually nearly empty. The only people you'd expect to see in those stores were gang members, maybe 1 to 6 actual customers at a time. This might seem irrelevant now, but it'll make more sense later in the story. Then came the night that changed everything. I was about to take out the trash while my family was sitting on the couch watching TV. As I was looking for the bag my mom had told me to take out, we suddenly heard sirens and ambulances outside. We all stepped out onto the balcony, which gave us a clear view of the commotion. This part is a little confusing, but I'll explain it as best as I can. Around the time the police were arriving outside the building, someone entered the elevator, most likely injured, and went up to the 5th floor. They entered one of the apartments. Specifically, it looked like my neighbor's apartment, the same neighbor I'd never seen before. The guy who always kept to himself and seemed almost mysterious. Up to that point, I wasn't even sure if it was him, but it seemed likely since, to my knowledge, he lived alone. Shortly after, the police came up to the floor and started banging on his door, before eventually forcing their way inside. And from that point on, that's all I know. There was an officer stationed by his door for about a week. I'd see him every day when I left for school. Sometimes he'd leave during the night, but during the day he was always there. Ever since then, there have been no updates. Nothing about what happened to my neighbor or what exactly went down that night. There was blood on the elevator floor. I know this because my mom noticed it later when she went to check things out after everything had calmed down. I still wonder what really happened to that neighbor, but I do have a theory. My guess is that he might have been involved in the gang activity around the area, and maybe someone shot him, either near or inside the building. Maybe a civilian saw what happened and called the police. I'll probably never know what truly happened, but I still think about it from time to time. What do you guys think happened to him? Because as far as I know, I may never find out.